Hello friends, here I am with the second presentation from Story Mob. Today I shall be reading out another story by Jeffery Deaver titled For Services Rendered. So the first part of the story coming right up. For Services Rendered. At first I thought it was me. But now I know for sure my husband's trying to drive me crazy. Dr. Harry Bernstein nodded and, after a moment's pause, dutifully noted his patient's words on the steno pad resting on his lap. I don't mean he's irritating me, driving me crazy that way. I mean, he's making me question my sanity. And he's doing it on purpose. Patsy Randolph, facing away from Harry on his leather couch, turned to look at her psychiatrist. Even though he kept his Park Avenue office quite dark during his sessions, he could see that there were tears in her eyes. "You're very upset, ma'am," he said in a kind tone. "Sure, I'm upset," she said, "and I'm scared." This woman, in her late 40s, had been his patient for 2 months. She had been close to tears several times during their sessions, but had never actually cried. Tears are important barometers of emotional weather. Some patients go for years without crying in front of their doctors, and when the eyes begin to water, any competent therapist sits up and takes notice. Harry studied Patsy closely as she turned away again and picked at a button on the cushion beside her thigh. "Go on," he encouraged. "Tell me about it." She snatched a Kleenex from the box beside the couch, dabbed at her eyes, but she did so carefully. As always, she wore impeccable makeup. "Please," Harry said in a soft voice. "It's happened a couple of times now," she began reluctantly. "But last night was the worst. I was lying in bed and I heard this voice. I couldn't really hear it clearly at first. Then it said..." She hesitated. "It said it was my father's ghost." Motives in therapy didn't get any better than this, and Harry paid close attention. "You weren't dreaming?" No, I was awake. I couldn't sleep and I had gotten up for a glass of water. Then I started walking around the apartment, just pacing. I felt frantic. I lay back in bed and the voice, Pate's voice, said that it was my father's ghost." "What did he say?" He just rambled on and on, telling me about all kinds of things from my past. Incidents from when I was a girl. I'm not sure. It was hard to hear." "And these were things your husband knew?" "Not all of them," her voice cracked. "But he could have found them out, looking through my letters and my yearbooks and things like that." "You're sure he was the one talking?" The voice sounded sort of like Peter's. "Anyway, who else could it be?" She laughed, her voice nearly a cackle. It could hardly be my father's ghost now, could it be?" "Maybe he was just talking in his sleep?" She didn't respond for a minute. "See, that's the thing. He wasn't in bed. He was in the den playing some video game." Harry continued to take his notes. "And you heard him from the den?" "He must have been at the door, Doctor. I know, it sounds ridiculous. I know it does. But I think he was kneeling at the door. It's right next to the bedroom, and was whispering." "Did you go to the den? Ask him about it?" "I walked to the door real fast, but by the time I opened it, he was back at the desk." She looked at her hands and found she had shredded the Kleenex. She glanced at Harry to see if he had noticed the compulsive behavior, which of course he had, and then stuffed the tissue into the pocket of her expensive beige slacks. And then I asked him if he had heard anything, any voices, and he looked at me like I was nuts and went back to his game. And that night you didn't hear any more voices? No. Harry studied his patient. She had been a pretty girl in her youth, he supposed, because she was a pretty woman now. Therapists always saw the child within the adult. Her face was sleek, and she had the slightly upturned nose of a Connecticut socialite who debates long and hard about having rhinoplasty but never does. He recalled that Patsy had told him her weight was never a problem. She'd hire a personal trainer whenever she gained 5 pounds. She had said, with irritation masking secret pride, that men often tried to pick her up in bars and coffee shops. He asked, "You say this had happened before, hearing the voice?" Another hesitation. Maybe 2 or 3 times, all within the past couple of weeks. But why would Peter want to drive you crazy? Patsy, who had come to Harry presenting with the classic symptoms of a routine midlife crisis, hadn't discussed her husband much yet. Harry knew he was good-looking, a few years younger than Patsy, not particularly ambitious. They had been married for 3 years, second marriages for both of them, and they didn't seem to have many interests in common. But of course, that was just Patsy's version. The facts that are revealed in a therapist's office can be very fishy. Harry Bernstein worked hard to become a human lie detector, and his impression of the marriage was that there was much unspoken conflict between the husband and the wife. Patsy considered his question. I don't know. I was talking to Sally. Harry remembered her mentioning Sally, her best friend. She was another Upper East Side matron, one of the ladies who lunch, and was married to the president of one of the biggest banks in New York. She said that maybe Peter's jealous of me. I mean, look at us. I'm the one with the social life. I have the friends. I have the money. He noticed a manic edge to her voice. She did too, and controlled it. I just don't know why he's doing it, but he is. Have you talked to him about this? I tried, but naturally he denies everything. She shook her head and tears swelled in her eyes again. And then the birds. Birds? Another Kleenex was snagged, used and shredded. She didn't hide the evidence this time. I have this collection of ceramic birds made by Bohm. Do you know about the company? No. They are very expensive. They are German, beautifully made. They belong to my parents. When our father died, Steve and I split the inheritance, but he got most of the personal family heirlooms. That really hurt me. But I did get the birds. Harry knew that her mother had died 10 years ago and her father about 3 years ago. The man had been very stern and had favored Patsy's older brother, Stephen. He had been patronizing to her all her life. I have 4 of them. There used to be 5, but when I was 12, I broke one. I ran inside. I was very excited about something, and I wanted to tell my father about it. And I bumped into the table and knocked one off. The sparrow. It broke. My father spanked me with a willow switch and sent me to bed without dinner. An important event. Harry made a note but decided not to pursue the incident any further at that moment. And the morning after, I heard my father's ghost for the first time. Her voice grew harsh. I mean, the morning after Peter started whispering to me. I found one of the birds broken. It was lying on the living room floor. I asked Peter why he had done it. He knows how important they were to me. And he denied it. He said I must have been sleepwalking and did it myself. But I know I didn't. Peter had to have been the one. She had slipped into her raw, irrational voice again. Harry glanced at the clock. He hated the legacy of the psychoanalyst, the perfectly timed 50-minute hour. There was so much more he wanted to delve into, but patience need consistency and, according to the old school, discipline. He said, I'm sorry, but I see our time's up. Dutifully, Patsy rose. Harry observed how dishevelled she looked. Yes, her makeup had been carefully applied, but the buttons on her blouse weren't done properly. Either she had dressed in a hurry or hadn't paid attention. And one of the straps on her expensive tan shoes wasn't hooked. She rose. Thank you, Doctor. It's good just to be able to tell someone about this. We'll get everything worked out. I'll see you next week. After Patsy had left the office, Harry Bernstein sat down at his desk. He spun slowly in his chair, gazing at his books. The DSM-4, The Psychopathology of Everyday Life, the APA Handbook of Neurosis, volumes by Freud, Adler, Jung, Karen Horney, hundreds of others. Then, looking out the window again, watching the late afternoon sunlight fall on the cars and taxis speeding north on Park Avenue. A bird flew past. He thought about the shattered ceramic sparrow from Patsy's childhood. And Harry thought, what a significant session this has been. Not only for his patient, but for him too. Patsy Randolph, who had until today been just another mildly discontented middle-aged patient, represented a watershed event for Dr. Harold David Bernstein. He was in a position to change her life completely, and in doing so, maybe he could redeem his own. Harry laughed out loud, spun again in the chair, like a child on a playground. Once, twice, 3 times. A figure appeared in the doorway. Doctor? Miriam, his secretary, cocked her head, which was covered with fussy white hair. Are you all right? I'm fine. Why are you asking? Well, it's just, I don't think I have heard you laugh for a long time. In fact, I don't think I have ever heard you laugh in your office. Which was another reason to laugh, and he did. She frowned, concern in her eyes. Harry stopped smiling. He looked at her gravely. Listen, I want you to take the rest of the day off. She looked mystified. But it's quitting time, Doctor. Ha ha, joke, he explained. It was a joke. See you tomorrow. Miriam eyed him cautiously, unable, it seemed, to shake the quizzical expression from her face. You're sure you're all right? I'm fine. Good night. Night, Doctor. A moment later, he heard the front door to the office click shut. He spun around in his chair once more, reflecting. Patsy Randolph, I can save you, and you can save me. And Dr. Harry Bernstein was a man badly in need of saving, because he hated what he did for a living. Not the business of helping patients with their mental and emotional problems. Oh no, he was a natural-born therapist, none better. What he hated was practicing Upper East Side psychiatry. It had been the last thing he'd ever wanted to do. But in his second year of Columbia Medical School, the tall, handsome student made the tall, beautiful assistant development director of the Museum of Modern Art. Harry and Linda were married before he started his internship. He moved out of his fifth-floor walk-up near Harlem and into her townhouse on East 81st. Within weeks, she had begun changing his life. Linda was a woman who had high aspirations for her man, very similar to Patsy, in whose offhand comment several weeks ago about her husband's lack of ambition, Harry had seen reams of anger. Linda wanted money. She wanted to be on the regulars list of benefits at the Met. She wanted to be pampered at four-star restaurants in Élysée and Monaco and Paris. A studious, easygoing man from a modest suburb of New York, Harry knew that by listening to Linda, he was headed in the wrong direction. But he was in love with her, so he continued to listen. They bought a co-op in a high-rise on Madison Avenue, and he hung up his shingle, well, a heavy brass plaque, outside his $3,000 a month office on Park and 78th. At first Harry had worried about the astronomical bills they were amassing, but soon the money was flowing in. He had no trouble getting business. There's no lack of neurosis among the rich and the insured on the Isle of Manhattan. He was also very good at what he did. His patients came and they liked him, and so they returned weekly. Their troubles may have been plebeian, even laughably minor at times, but his oath, as well as his character, wouldn't let Harry minimize them. He worked hard to help his patients. And all the while, he neglected what he really wanted to do, which was to treat severe mental cases. People who were paranoid schizophrenics, people with bipolar depression and borderline personalities, people who led sorrowful lives and couldn't hide from that sorrow with the money that Harry's patients had. From time to time, he had volunteered at various clinics, particularly a small one in Brooklyn that treated homeless men and women. But with his Park Avenue caseload and his wife's regimen of social obligations, there had been no way he could devote much time to the clinic. He had wrestled with the thought of just chucking his Park Avenue practice. Of course, if he had done that, his income would have dropped by 90%. He and Linda had 2 children a couple of years after they had gotten married. 2 sweet daughters Harry loved very much. And their needs, very expensive needs, private school sorts of needs, had taken priority over his personal contentment. Besides, as idealistic as he was in many ways, Harry had known that Linda would leave him in a flash if he had started working full-time in Brooklyn. But the irony was that, even after Linda did leave him, for someone she had met at one of the society benefits that Harry couldn't bear to attend, he hadn't been able to spend any more time at the clinic than he had when he had been married. The debts Linda had run up while they were married were excruciating. His oldest daughter was in an expensive college, and his younger was on her way to Vassar next year. Yet, out of the dozens of patients who whined about minor dissatisfactions, here came Patsy Randolph, a truly desperate patient, a woman telling him about ghosts, about her husband trying to drive her insane, a woman clearly on the brink. A patient, at last, who would give Harry a chance to redeem his life. That night, he didn't bother with dinner. He came home and went straight into his den, where sat stacked in high piles a year's worth of the professional journals that he had never bothered to read, since they dealt with serious psychiatric issues and didn't much affect the patients in his practice. He kicked his shoes off and began sifting through them, taking notes. He found internet sites devoted to psychotic behavior, and he spent hours online, downloading articles that could help him with Patsy's situation. Harry was rereading an obscure article in the Journal of Psychosis, which he had been thrilled to find. It was the key to dealing with her case when he sat up, hearing a shrill whistle. He had been so preoccupied. Had he forgotten he had put on the tea kettle for coffee? But then he glanced outside the window and realized that it wasn't the kettle at all. The sound was from a bird sitting on a branch nearby, singing. The hour was well past dawn. She told him. There had been more voices. Her husband kept pretending to be the ghost of her father, whispering terrible things to her. What, Harry asked, had the ghost said? She answered, what a bad daughter she had been, what a terrible wife she was now, what a shallow friend. Why didn't she just kill herself and quit bringing pain to everyone's life? Harry jotted a note. Did it sound like your father's voice? The tone, I mean. Not my father, she said, her voice cracking with anger. It was my husband pretending to be my father. I told you that. I know, but the sound, the timbre? She thought. Maybe. But then my husband had met him. And there are videos of that. Peter must have heard them and impersonated him. Where was Peter when you heard him? She studied a bookshelf. He wasn't exactly home. He wasn't? No. He went out for cigarettes. But I figured out how he did it. He must have rigged up some kind of a speaker and tape recorder. Or maybe one of those walkie-talkie things. Her voice faded. Peter's also a good mimic, doing impersonations. So he could do all the voices. All the voices? She cleared her throat. I mean, there were more ghosts this time. Her voice rising again manically. My grandfather, my mother, others, I don't even know who. Patsy stared at him for a moment, then looked down. She clicked her porch lash compulsively, then looked inside, took out her compact and lipstick. She stared at the makeup, put it away. Her hands were shaking. Harry waited a long moment. Patsy, I want to ask you something. You can ask me anything, Doctor. Just assume, for the sake of argument, that Peter wasn't pretending to be the ghosts. Where else could they be coming from? She snapped. You don't believe a word of this, do you? The most difficult part of being a therapist is making sure your patients know you are on their side, while you continue pursuing the truth. He said evenly, It's certainly possible what you're saying about your husband, but let's put that aside and consider that there's another reason for the voices. Which is? That you did hear something. Maybe your husband on the phone, maybe the TV, maybe the radio, but whatever it was had nothing to do with ghosts. You projected your own thoughts onto what you heard. You're saying it's all in my head? I'm saying that maybe the words themselves are originating in your subconscious. What do you think about that? She considered this for a moment. I don't know. It could be. I suppose that makes some sense. Harry smiled. That's good, Patsy. That's a good first step, admitting that. She seemed pleased. A student who had been given a gold star by a teacher. Then the psychiatrist grew serious. Now, one thing. When the voices talk about you're hurting yourself, you're not going to listen to them, are you? No, I won't. She offered a brave smile. Of course not. Good. He glanced at the clock. I see our time's just about up, Patsy. I want you to do something. I want you to keep a diary of what the voices say to you. A diary? All right. Write down everything they say and we'll go through it together. She rose, turned to him. Maybe I should just ask one of the ghosts to come along to a session. But then you'd have to charge me double, wouldn't you? He laughed. See you next week, Patsy. At 3 a.m. the next morning, Harry was wakened by a phone call. Dr. Bernstein? Yes. I'm Officer Kavanaugh with Police Department. Sitting up, trying to shake off his drowsiness, he thought immediately of Herb, a patient at the clinic in Brooklyn. The poor man, a mild schizophrenic, who was completely harmless, was forever getting beat up because of his gruff, threatening manner. But that wasn't the reason for the call. You're Mrs. Patricia Randall's psychiatrist, is that correct? His heart thudded hard. Yes, I am. Is she all right? We've had a call. We found her on the street outside her apartment. No one's hurt, but she's a bit hysterical. I'll be right there. When he arrived at the Randolph's apartment building 10 blocks away, Harry found Patsy and her husband in the front lobby. A uniformed policeman stood next to them. Harry knew that the Randolphs were wealthy, but the building was much nicer than he had expected. It was one of the luxurious high-rises that Donald Trump had built in the 80s. There were penthouses, duplex selling for $20 million, Harry had read in the Times. Doctor! Oh, doctor! Patsy cried when she saw Harry. She ran to him. Harry was careful about physical contact with his patients. He knew all about transference and countertransference, the perfectly normal attraction between patients and their therapists. But contact had to be handled carefully. Harry took Patsy by the shoulders so that she couldn't hug him and led her back to the lobby couch. Mr. Randolph? Harry asked, turning to her husband. That's right. I'm Harry Bernstein. The men shook hands. Peter Randolph was very much what Harry was expecting. He was a trim, athletic man of about 40, handsome. His eyes were angry and bewildered and looked victimized. He reminded Harry of a patient he had treated briefly, a man whose sole complaint in life was that he was having trouble maintaining a life with a wife and 2 mistresses. Peter wore a burgundy silk bathrobe and supple leather slippers. "Would you mind if I spoke to Patsy alone?" Harry asked him. "No. I'll be upstairs if you need me." He said this to both Harry and the police officer. Harry too glanced at the cop, who also stepped away and let the doctor talk to his patient. "What happened?" Harry asked Patsy. "The bird," she said, choking back tears. "One of those ceramic birds?" "Yes," she whispered. "He broke it." Harry studied her carefully. She was in bad shape tonight. Hair stringy, robe filthy, fingernails unclean. As in her session the other day, surprisingly, only her makeup was normal. "Tell me about what had happened." "I was asleep, and then I heard this voice say, 'Run! You have to get out. They're almost here. They're going to hurt you.' And I jumped out of bed and ran into the living room. And there was a bomb bird, the robin. It was shattered and scattered all over the floor. I started screaming because I knew they were after me." Her voice rose. "The ghosts, Peter was after me. I just threw on my robe and escaped." "And what did Peter do?" "He ran after me." "But he didn't hurt you, right?" She hesitated. "No." She looked around the cold marble lobby with paranoid eyes. "Well, what he did was he called the police. But don't you see? Peter didn't have any choice. He had to call the police. Isn't that what somebody would normally do if their wife ran out of the apartment, screaming? Not calling them would have been suspicious." Her voice faded. Harry looked for signs of over-medication or drinking. He could see none. She looked around the lobby once more. "Are you feeling better now?" She nodded. "I'm sorry," she said, "making you come all the way over here tonight." "That's what I'm here for. Tell me, you don't hear any voices now, do you?" "No." "And the bird? Could it have been an accident?" She thought about this for a moment. "Well, Peter was asleep. Maybe I was looking at it earlier and left it on the edge of the table." She sounded perfectly reasonable. "Maybe the housekeeper did. I might have bumped it." The policeman looked at his watch and then ambled over. He asked, "Can I talk to you, doctor?" They stepped into a corner of the lobby. "I'm thinking I ought to take her downtown," the cop said in a queen's drawl. "She was pretty out of control before, but it's your call. You think she's Edie?" Emotionally disturbed. The trigger diagnosis for involuntary commitment. If he said yes, Patsy would be taken off and hospitalized. This was the critical moment. Harry debated. "I can help you and you can help me." He said to the cop, "Give me a minute." He returned to Patsy, sat down next to her. "We have a problem. The police want to take you to a hospital, and if you claim that Peter's trying to drive you crazy or hurt you, the fact is the judge just isn't going to believe you." "Me? I'm not doing anything. It's the voices. It's them. It's Peter." "But they're not going to believe you, Patsy. That's just the way it is. Now you can go back upstairs and carry on with your life, or they can take you downtown to the city hospital. And you don't want that, believe me. Can you stay in control?" She lowered her head to her hands. Finally she said, "Yes, doctor, I can." "Good. Patsy, I want to ask you something else. I want to see your husband alone. Can I call him? Have him come in?" "Why?" she asked, her face dark with suspicion. "Because I'm your doctor and I want to get to the bottom of what's bothering you." She glanced at the cop, gave him a dark look. Then she said to Harry, "Sure." "Good." After Patsy had disappeared into the elevator car, the cop said, "I don't know, doctor. She seems like a nutcase to me. Things like this, they can get real ugly. I've seen it a million times." "She has got some problems, but she's not dangerous." "And you're willing to take the chance?" After a moment, he said, "Yes, I'm willing to take that chance." "How was she last night after I left?" Harry asked Peter Randolph the next morning. The two men sat in Harry's office. "She seemed all right, calmer." Peter sipped the coffee that Miriam had brought him. "What exactly is going on with her?" "I'm sorry," Harry said. "I can't discuss the specifics of your wife's condition with you. Confidentiality, you know." Peter's eyes flared angrily for a moment. "Then why did you ask me here?" "Because I need you to help me treat her. You do want her to get better, don't you?" "Of course I do. I love her very much." He sat forward in his chair. "But I don't understand what's going on. She was fine until a couple of months ago, when she started seeing you. If you have to know the truth, then things started to go bad." "See, when people see therapists, they sometimes confront issues they have never had to deal with. I think that was Patsy's situation. She's getting close to some important issues, and that can be very disorienting." "She claims I'm pretending to be a ghost," Peter said sarcastically. "That seems a little worse than just disoriented." "She is in a downward spiral. I can pull her out of it, but it'll be hard, and I'll need your help." Peter shrugged. "What can I do?" Harry explained, "First of all, you can be honest with me." "Of course." "For some reason, she has come to associate you with her father. She has a lot of resentment toward him, and she is projecting that onto you. Do you know why she's mad at you?" There was silence for a moment. "Go on. Tell me. Anything you say here is confidential, just between you and me." "Well, she might have the stupid idea that I've cheated on her." "Have you?" "What the hell do you get off asking a question like that?" Harry said reasonably, "I'm just trying to get to the truth." Randolph calmed down. "No, I haven't cheated on her. She's paranoid." "And you haven't said or done anything that might trouble her deeply or affect her sense of reality?" "No," Peter said. "How much is she worth?" Harry asked bluntly. Peter blinked. "You mean her portfolio?" "Net worth." "I don't know exactly. About 11 million?" Harry nodded. "And the money's all hers, isn't it?" A frown crossed Peter Randolph's face. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if Patsy were to go insane or to kill herself, would you get her money?" "Go to hell!" Randolph shouted, standing up quickly. For a moment Harry thought the man was going to hit him, but he pulled his wallet from his hip pocket and took out a card. Tossed it onto Harry's desk. "That's our lawyer. Call him and ask him about the prenuptial agreement. If Patricia's declared insane, or if she were to die, the money goes into a trust. I don't get a penny." Harry pushed the card back. "That won't be necessary." "I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings," he said. "My patient's care comes before everything else. I had to know there's no motive for harming her." Randolph adjusted his cuffs and buttoned his jacket. Accepted. Harry nodded and looked Peter Randolph over carefully. A prerequisite for being a therapist is the ability to judge character quickly. He now sized up this man and came to a decision. I want to try something radical with Patsy, and I want you to help me. Radical? You mean commit her? No, that would be the worst thing for her. When patients are going through times like this, you can't coddle them. You have to be tough and force them to be tough. Meaning? Don't be antagonistic, but force her to stay involved in life. She's going to want to withdraw, to be pampered, but don't spoil her. If she says she's too upset to go shopping or go out to dinner, don't let her get away with it. Insist that she does what she's supposed to do. You're sure that's the best? Sure. Harry asked himself. No, he wasn't the least bit sure. But he had made his decision. He had to push Patsy hard. He told Peter, we don't have any choice. But after the man left the office, Harry happened to recall an expression one of his medical school professors had used frequently. He had said, you have to attack a disease head on. You have to kill or cure. Harry hadn't thought of that expression in years. He wished he hadn't today. The next day, Patsy walked into his office without an appointment. In Brooklyn, at the clinic, this was standard procedure and nobody thought anything of it. But in a Park Avenue shrink's office, impromptu sessions were a taboo. Still, Harry could see from her face that she was very upset, and he didn't make an issue of her unexpected appearance. She collapsed on the couch and hugged herself closely as he rose and closed the door. Patsy, what's the matter? He asked. He noticed that her clothes were more disheveled than he had ever seen. They were stained and torn, hair bedraggled, fingernails dirty. Everything was going so well, she sobbed. Then I was sitting in the den early this morning and I heard my father's ghost again. He said, they're almost here. You don't have much time left. And I asked, what do you mean? And he said, look in the living room. And I did, and there was another one of my birds. It was shattered. She opened her purse and showed Harry the broken pieces of ceramic. Now there's only one left. I'm going to die when it breaks. I know I am. Peter's going to break it tonight. And then he'll kill me. He's not going to kill you, Patsy, Harry said calmly, patiently ignoring her hysteria. I think I should go to the hospital for a while, Doctor. Harry got up and sat on the couch next to her. He took her hand. No. What? It would be a mistake, Harry said. Why? She cried. Because you can't hide from these issues. You have to confront them. But I'd feel safer in a hospital, Doctor. Nobody's tried to kill me in the hospital. Nobody's going to kill you, Patsy. You have to believe me. No, Peter. But Peter's never tried to hurt you, has he? A pause. No. Okay. Here's what I want you to do. Listen to me. Are you listening? Yes. You know that whether Peter was pretending to say those words to you or you were imagining them, they weren't real. Repeat that. I repeat it. They weren't real. Now say, there was no ghost. My father's dead. There was no ghost. My father's dead. Good. Harry laughed. Again. She repeated this mantra several times, calming each time. Finally, a faint smile crossed her lips. Then she frowned. But the bird? She again opened her purse and took out the shattered ceramic, cradling the pieces in her trembling hand. Whatever happened to the bird doesn't matter. It's only a piece of porcelain. But she looked down at the broken shards. Harry leaned forward. Listen to me, Patsy. Listen carefully. Passionately, the doctor said, I want you to go home, take that last bird and smash the hell out of it. You want me to? Take a hammer and crush it. She started to protest, but then she smiled. Can I do that? You bet you can. Just give yourself permission to. Go home, have a nice glass of wine, find a hammer and smash it. He reached under his desk and picked up the wastebasket. He held it out for her. They're just pieces of china, Patsy. After a moment, she tossed the pieces of the statue into the container. Good, Patsy. And, thinking, the hell with transference, the doctor gave his patient a huge hug. That evening, Patsy Randolph returned home and found Peter sitting in front of the television. You're late, he said. Where have you been? Out shopping. I got a bottle of wine. We're supposed to go to Jack and Louise's tonight. Don't tell me you forgot. I don't feel like it, she said. I don't feel well. No, we are going. You're not getting out of it. He spoke in that same weird, abrupt tone he had been using for the last 1 week. Well, can I at least take care of a few things first? Sure, but I don't want to be late. Patsy walked into the kitchen, opened a bottle of the expensive Merlot, and poured a large glass, just like Dr. Bernstein had told her. She sipped it. She felt good. Very good. Where's the hammer? She called. Hammer? What do you need a hammer for? I have to fix something. I think it's in the drawer beside the refrigerator. She found it, carried it into the living room. She glanced at the last poem bird, an owl. Peter looked at the tool, then back to the TV. What do you have to fix? You, she answered, and brought the blunt end down on the top of his head with all her strength. It took another dozen blows to kill him, and when she had finished, she stood back and gazed at the remarkable patterns the blood made on the carpet and the couch. Then she went into the bedroom, picked up her diary from the bedside table, the one Dr. Bernstein had suggested she keep. Back in the living room, Patsy sat down beside her husband's corpse and wrote a rambling passage in the booklet about how, at last, she had gotten the ghosts to stop speaking to her. She was finally at peace. She didn't add as much as she wanted to, though. It was very time-consuming to write using your finger for a pen and blood for ink. When Patsy had finished, she picked up the hammer and smashed the poem ceramic owl into dust. Then she began screaming as loudly as she could. The ghosts are dead! The ghosts are dead! The ghosts are dead! Long before she was hoarse, the police and the medics arrived. When they took her away, she was wearing a straitjacket. A week later, Harry Bernstein sat in the prison hospital waiting room. He knew he was a sight. He hadn't shaved in several days and was wearing wrinkled clothes, which in fact he had slept in last night. He stared at the filthy floor. You all right? This question came from a tall, thin man with a perfect beard. He wore a gorgeous suit and Armani-framed glasses. He was Patsy's lead defense lawyer. I never thought she'd do it, Harry said to him. I knew there was a risk. I knew something was wrong, but I thought I had everything under control. The lawyer looked at him sympathetically. I heard you have been having some patient trouble too. Your patients are... Harry laughed bitterly. Are quitting in droves. Well, wouldn't you? Park Avenue shrinks are a dime a dozen. Why should they come and take a risk seeing me? I might get them killed or committed. The jailer opened the door. Dr. Bernstein, you can see the prisoner now. He stood slowly, supporting himself on the door frame. The lawyer looked him over and said, You and I can meet in the next couple of days to decide how to handle the case. The insanity defense is tough in New York, but with you on board, I can make it work. We'll keep her out of jail. Say, Doctor, you're going to be okay, right? Harry gave a shallow nod. The lawyer said kindly, I can arrange for a little cash for you. A couple of $1,000 for an expert witness fee. Thanks, Harry said, but he instantly forgot about the money. His mind was already on his patient. The room was as bleak as he had expected. Face white, eyes shrunken, Patsy lay in bed, looking out of the window. She glanced at Harry, didn't seem to recognize him. How are you feeling? He asked. Who are you? She frowned. He didn't answer her question either. You're not looking too bad, Patsy. I think I know you. Yes. You are... Wait, are you a ghost? No, I'm not a ghost. Harry set his attaché case on the table. Her eyes slipped to the case as he opened it. I can't stay long, Patsy. I'm closing my practice. There's a lot to take care of, but I wanted to bring you a few things. Thanks, she asked, sounding like a child. For me, like Christmas, like my birthday. Harry rummaged in the case. Here's the first thing. He took out a photocopy. It's an article in the Journal of Psychosis. I found it the night after the session when you first told me about the ghosts. You should read it. I can't read, she said. I don't know how. I'm afraid of the food here. I think there are spies around. They're going to put things in the food. Disgusting things. And poison. Or broken glass. Harry set the article on the bed next to her. He walked to the window. No trees here. No birds. Just grey downtown Manhattan. He said, glancing back at her, It's all about ghosts. The article. Her eyes narrowed and then fear consumed her face. Ghosts, she whispered. Are there ghosts here? Harry laughed hard. See, Patsy, ghosts were the first clue. After you mentioned them in that session, claiming that your husband was driving you crazy, I thought something didn't sound quite right. So I went home and started to research your case. She gazed at him silently. That article's about the importance of diagnosis in mental health cases. See, sometimes it works to somebody's advantage to appear to be mentally unstable, so that they can avoid responsibility. Say, soldiers who don't want to fight, people faking insurance claims, people who have committed crimes. He turned back, or who are about to commit a crime. I'm afraid of ghosts, Patsy said, her voice rising. I'm afraid of ghosts. I don't want any ghosts here. I'm afraid of ghosts. Harry continued like a lecturing professor. And ghosts are one of the classic hallucinations that sane people use to try to convince other people that they are insane. Patsy closed her mouth. Fascinating article, Harry continued, nodding toward it. See, ghosts and spirits seem like the products of delusional minds, but in fact, they are complex metaphysical concepts that someone who's really insane wouldn't understand at all. No, true psychotics believe that the actual person is there speaking to them. They think that Napoleon or Hitler or Marilyn Monroe is really in the room with them. You wouldn't have claimed to have heard your father's ghost. You would actually have heard him. Harry enjoyed the utterly shocked expression on his patient's face. He said, "Then, a few weeks ago, you admitted that maybe the voices were in your head. A true psychotic would never admit that. They'd swear they were completely sane." He paced slowly. "There were some other things too. You must have read somewhere that sloppy physical appearance is a sign of mental illness. Your clothes were torn and dirty, you'd forget to do straps, but your makeup was always perfect. Even on the night the police called me over to your apartment. In genuine mental health cases, makeup is the first thing to go. Patients just smear their faces with makeup. Has to do with issues of masking their identity, if you're interested. Oh, and remember? You asked if a ghost could come to one of your sessions? That was very funny. But the psychiatric literature defines humor as an ironic juxtaposition of concepts based on common experience. Of course, that's contrary to the mental processes of psychotics." "What the hell does that mean?" Patsy spat out. "That crazy people don't make jokes," he summarized. "That cinched it for me, that you were as sane as you could be." Harry looked through the attache case once more. Next, he looked up smiling. "After I read that article and decided that you were faking your diagnosis and listening to what your subconscious was telling me about your marriage, I figured you were using me for some reason having to do with your husband. So I hired a private eye." "Jesus Christ! You did what?" "Here's his report." He dropped the folder on the bed. "It says, basically, that your husband was having an affair and was forging checks on your main investment account. You knew about his mistress and the money, and you had talked to a lawyer about divorcing him. But Peter knew that you were having an affair too, with your friend Sally's husband. Peter used that to blackmail you into not divorcing him." Patsy stared at him, frozen. He nodded at the report. "Oh, you may as well look at it. Pretending you can't read? Doesn't fly. Reading has nothing to do with psychotic behavior. It's a developmental and IQ issue." She opened the report, read through it, then tossed it aside disgustedly. "Son of a bitch!" Harry said, "You wanted to kill Peter, and you wanted me to establish that you were insane. For your defense, you would go into the private hospital, there would be a mandatory hearing in a year end, and bang, you'd pass the tests and be released." She shook her head. "But you knew my goal was to kill Peter, and you let me do it? Hell, you encouraged me to do it." "And when I saw Peter, I encouraged him to antagonize you. It was time to move things along. I was getting tired of our sessions, you know." Then Harry's face darkened with genuine regret. "I never thought you would actually kill him, though. Just thought you would assault him. But hey, What can I say? Psychiatry is an inexact science. But why didn't you go to the police? She said, whispering close to panic. Ah, that has to do with the third thing I brought for you. I can help you, and you can help me. He lifted an envelope out of his briefcase and handed it to her. What is this? My bill. She opened it, took out the sheet of paper. At the top was written, for services rendered, and below that, $10 million. Are you crazy? Patsy gasped. Given the present location and context of their conversation, Harry had to laugh at her choice of words. Peter was nice enough to tell me exactly what you were worth. I'm leaving you $1 million, which you'll probably need to pay that slick lawyer of yours. He looks expensive. Now, I'll need cash or a certified check before I testify at your trial. Otherwise, I'll have to share it with the court. My honest diagnosis about your condition. You're blackmailing me? I guess I am. Why? Because with this money, I can afford to do some good and help people who really need helping. He nodded at the bill. I'd write that check pretty soon. They have the death penalty in New York now. Oh, and by the way, I'd lose that bit about the food being poisoned. Around here, you make a stink about food, they'll just put you on a tube. He picked up his attaché case. Wait, she begged. Don't leave. Let's talk about this. Sorry. Harry nodded at a wall clock. I see our time is up.